Thank you, and thank you everyone for attending today. My name is Ken Giffen. I lead the marketing team here at Visible Technologies, and really thrilled to partner with Quarks today on the webinar. We have over 900 people that registered for today's event, and we know that this is a topic of interest, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So a little housekeeping to get us started here. For those of you who may be wanting to tweet about some of the learnings and findings that you have from today, we do have a hashtag here which is @VisibleResearch, and feel free to use that when you're sharing on social media. The topic, as you know, is 6 ways that social intelligence or social analytics can really apply and be of interest in the market research crowd. And I will be covering those 6 ways. But I'm also going to be introducing a couple of our analysts from the Visible team who will be talking about some real-world examples and really bringing to life how social media analytics can really help. And as mentioned at the very beginning of the call, we will be doing question and answers at the very end. So feel free to send your questions via chat throughout the webinar. We'll be having someone monitor that here. And then at the end of the actual conversation, we'll wrap up with the Q&A. So as mentioned, my name is Ken Giffen, and I run the marketing team here. I really do want to focus on this particular slide, though, about Caitlin Jamali and David Cullen. They are both experienced analytics in social media and unstructured data, and they will be sharing some of their insights with you today. But I think it's really important to note that both Caitlin and Dave spent time prior to Visible in the traditional market research world. And I think their perspectives of handling traditional research data and methodologies and handling social media analytics and unstructured data and methodologies and being able to bring those two together is really key for today's conversation. So both of them will be talking a little bit about examples that they've experienced in their life and reflecting back on some of their experiences from past more traditional research avenues. And to start out, we have a quick question for you. And we understand that most of the participants in today's call are probably seasoned researchers, but we also know from dealing with our customers that not everyone is always as seasoned as they would like to be in the social media analytics space. And so the quick question that you should see now on your screen is just doing a selection between how much experience that you have today for supporting market research activities with social intelligence. And your choices are really none, getting started, analyzing social data often, or you're a ninja. And we will actually be showcasing the results in real time. So if you just click on one of the buttons that you should see right now, and I will wait just about 15 seconds and give you all a chance just to click, and then I will actually go ahead and share the results with everyone. So wait just about another 5 seconds. Okay. So now let's actually skip to the results. Okay, so you should see the results now populating on the screen. And as you see here, about 50% of you say that you're getting started, which is the most often noted. And this is moving around just a little bit as everyone wraps up. We only have a few ninjas in the audience, and that's fairly reflective of what we see with our client base. But it's nice to see that about a quarter of you are saying that you analyze social media data often. And I think some of the examples that we'll share with you today will really bring in. So I'm going to go ahead and close out this poll, and then I'm going to move on to our next slide. So let's just talk a little bit about what Visible is seeing in terms of our customers. Traditionally, to give you some context, if you're not familiar with Visible, our customers really represent more agency or enterprise accounts, and they are usually people who are using social media analytics across a spectrum of departments and teams. But one of the things that we see with our customers that is really common is this notion of speed to insight. And especially when the researchers are involved, I think there's definitely this sense of pressure of handling those questions that come up in between more traditional, let's say, brand tracking studies, that there are answers that are needed on a daily basis. So there's a meeting at 4 o'clock this afternoon, a question has come up, and really someone wants same-day answers to that question. And that's where social analytics really comes into play, is the ability to go out and grab quick insights from data in real time. Another thing that we see from our customers is this ability to both evaluate structured and unstructured data in the world of social media. And there are teams that we see now that are starting to form where people have both people that are experts in structured and unstructured that are, instead of working apart, are now working together. And we also see instances where clients may have a traditional research team and then want to partner with someone like Visible or someone else that they know in the unstructured or social media analytics space to complement the skills that they have in-house. As I mentioned earlier, we're really seeing one of the areas of pressure for research is the fact that 3 years ago, even 4 years ago, social media and social media intelligence was something that was relatively contained in the marketing organization. And while it's still thriving in the marketing organization, that same data now is not just in marketing, but it's also going to other departments such as customer care, such as executives, and in some cases even streamed, let's say, in the lobby of one of the enterprise companies, showcasing brand insights. And all of that means that social data is just becoming more ingrained across the organization. And therefore, with a researcher, then there's more of a pressure to make sure that you can react to that. So certainly it's much more visible than it used to be. But the last point I think is the most important on this particular slide, and that's this concept of less is more. I know if you are following articles about marketing and research, that big data seems to be a headline that is captured in about every 4th or 5th article that I see. But what we're really finding from our customers is, yes, big data is really important, but it's actually finding those pinpoint insights and really the results that matter that are much more important. And as all of you know that have had experience with unstructured social data, if you take a look at the data as a whole, it can be really messy. And so the clients that we are working with that are really leading the charge are the ones that are really getting adept with segmentation, geolocation, and really finding those true insights that matter. And we will talk a little bit about that today as well. But again, I think this notion of less is more is something that we're seeing in terms of trends with social media analytics. So as I mentioned at the top of the hour, really the focus for today is covering 6 ways that market researchers can better leverage social media analytics or social intelligence. And I have 3 of the 6 listed on this particular slide. And so we'll start off here. And one of the first ones that we want to start out with is something that seems really simple as a concept, and that's the notion of participant recruiting into other research efforts. And for those of you who are seasoned researchers, you know that sometimes the recruitment process can be really painful. And just a reminder that social media can actually be a really great way to find participants for other more traditional research studies that you have. And not only is it helpful to be able to find and recruit those people, but it's also helpful to provide you a little more in-depth background or perspective of what this person is really like even before those research efforts start. So that one to us is a simple one that's almost on its own to the side. The next, though, is this notion of informing and validating traditional research. And I think a lot of people may be familiar with the concept of using social insights as an initial barometer to maybe find out organically what people are talking about out in the market space, and then bringing in traditional research behind that to really validate those initial social insights. But we're also seeing really social be an anchor on the end of traditional research. And if I give you an example there, let's say you're doing a tracking study and you're looking at satisfaction rates of automotive dealers as an example. And you're taking the data to determine just how satisfied are customers within dealers, let's say in certain cities or certain locations. What can be easily done with social intelligence on top of that is combining those insights that you would have from a traditional research perspective to find out what are the social insights, again, associated with a specific dealer in a specific market or city, and trying to compare to see, do the social insights match up with the traditional research insights. So for example, if you had a dealer that was receiving all 5s on a scale of 1 to 5 with satisfaction, but social media in that same area was showcasing a significant amount of complaints about the dealer, it might be an area that you could bring in to see, is there something that is challenging the traditional data, or maybe the way that research is actually being used at that particular location, or is there something going on with that dealer that is just out of the ordinary? The last thing here on this slide is competitive intelligence. And really the key here to note is, if you are in a research role, are you leveraging, even if a social analytics or social intelligence platform is not in your department per se, are you going and leveraging that platform to be able to find analysis and find insights about competitive intelligence? Because if you have a platform in your organization, it should be something that you should leverage. It's a really easy way that you can compare, let's say, Toyota versus Honda owners in terms of how they feel about maybe satisfaction with fuel economy, or satisfaction with, let's say, performance. And some of those insights can be really valuable for you as you head into a more traditional research efforts, maybe with one of those brands. So again, participant recruiting, informing and validating traditional research either on the front or back end, and leveraging competitive intelligence for studies before or after. And the last 3 really sync up to a similar concept. So you'll see that they say trend identification, brand tracking, and product ideation. But I think the commonality for these 3 is really a notion of how social media analytics have really improved in the past couple of years, and how segmentation has become much more important. Again, people looking at social media at a really broad perspective sometimes feel like the insights might not be succinct enough to really draw a conclusion. But today with segmentation, you can go into a particular audience and go into a particular section and say, I just want to isolate, for example, a behavioral attribute, such as find out how people feel like about a particular brand who are in the consideration phase. Or I just want to find out how moms feel about a particular brand or particular attribute of a product. And I think all of these things are really important, and things that are now surfacing because of the advancement in social segmentation. But in addition to social segmentation is also a notion of the fact that you can really customize now your analysis to be very specific for certain events for a brand or for a campaign. So if you say, for example, I had a marketing campaign that launched on June 12th and wrapped up on June 24th, you can set social segmentation to actually measure results before, during, and after those time periods. And those are ways that you can really isolate specific market changes, or maybe specific brand crises or specific events, and use social to really indicate how customers are changing or feeling about that particular brand or feeling about that individual campaign. So again, trend identification, brand tracking and optimization, and product ideation are all really 3 other key areas. So now that we have that quick overview, one of the things I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it over to Caitlin. And we have 3 examples today that we'd like to go into a little more detail of how we have worked with clients and how they're really leveraging some of these 6 areas of social analytics and intelligence. And so, Caitlin, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you and let you talk a little bit about the world of financial services.
Great, thanks, Ken. As Ken just mentioned, one of the ways that market researchers can use social media analytics is for brand health tracking and for competitive intelligence. And I'm sure that many of you are pretty familiar with brand health tracking. I know that's how I spent most of my time in traditional research before I moved into social. And the example that I want to share with you here is that in my work for a global financial service provider, they're consistently looking to better understand the health of their brand, looking to understand the competitive metrics through social listening and how that can supplement the traditional research they're already doing. So you're probably familiar with traditional research measures of awareness or net promoter scores. And so what social can provide is kind of some deeper insight into what's causing those shifts in net promoter scores. And we can do that by taking a look into net sentiment, understanding what's driving those positive and negative discussion points, and looking at this for both the brand as well as across the competitive landscape to try and understand what is going on. It can help assess the impact of an announcement in real time and how people are responding to that, either positively or negatively. And for this particular client, what's been so rewarding is that supplementing their traditional research with social is that we've been able to identify themes that are driving discussion and some attitudinal changes that would later be reflected in consumer behavior that was actually moving the needle on those traditional research scores like net promoter scores or just general awareness. So ultimately, it's making social a signpost for what's later going to be reflected in traditional research.
Great. So anything else, Caitlin, or are we ready to go on to Dave?
I think we can move on to Dave.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thanks, and I know we'll come back to you in a minute. So Dave, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about the insurance industry and your experience marrying both traditional and social.
Okay. Thanks, Ken. In this example, we're working with a multi-line insurance provider who is looking to improve marketing and messaging around their long-term care insurance products. And I think it's a great example of combining social data with traditional market research. So in this case, the company had conducted an extensive motivational segmentation of the long-term care insurance consumer and had uncovered some really well-defined segments. Now, they had chosen about 3 audiences that they considered to be their key audiences for their product, and then had 4 others that were kind of secondary in nature. Now, initially, what they wanted was to find out some basics about where people were talking online and what kinds of information consumers were looking for as they traveled on their customer journey from starting to think about long-term care insurance to finally making that purchase. So what we did is we looked at content from forums. And now this is an area of social media where we typically see the greatest amount of conversation occurring amongst consumers. And we specifically looked for conversation from people who are on that purchase journey spectrum. We were able to segment where in the purchase process these people were based on the types of things they were discussing and the kinds of questions they were asking in their posts. What we were then able to do is to look at the company's well-defined motivational segment definitions and overlay those segments on what we had found. Now, by doing this, we were able to provide insight into not only where people were going online to discuss long-term care insurance and what kinds of information they were looking for, but we were also able to show the differences in the questions asked by the consumers in the different motivational segments and where they were in that purchase journey as it related to long-term care insurance. Now, this information was used not only to validate the findings from the segmentation study, but it also provided them with the various sites and communities to target, the language that people were using online, and in the end, it really helped enhance their communication strategy and gave them things to think about in terms of new ways of connecting with their customers. So it really married the social learnings with the traditional market research segmentation.
All right, great. Thank you, Dave. So Caitlin, we're going to go back to you because I know you have another example back in financial services. It's a little different from what you were talking about before.
Yep, that's right. Another way of using research, of social research, to really enhance traditional marketing research can be seen through marketing optimization. And so in this case, again, this global financial service provider is looking to understand how their marketing campaign performance is going to fare or how it fares in real time. So they're trying to understand the impact on brand linkage and overall perception of the brand. Now, as I'm sure all of you know, that these are key business questions that can be answered through traditional research methodologies. But the difference is that this often provides a very post-mortem view. Typically when you're doing that type of research, the campaign has ended and there's little that you can do to change it if it went well or if it went awry. It's over. And so there's really no dynamic relationship with the research. What social provides is that opportunity to assess the performance of the marketing campaign and to see what people are saying and how they're responding to it in real time. So it provides an opportunity to gauge the campaign performance and to make any tweaks to the campaign before the campaign has ended, and hopefully to catch that early on. In this particular situation, what was so effective with social is that it enabled the provider to actively refine the messaging mid-campaign. And that was based on some of the positive and negative conversations that they were seeing happen in forums and what they were seeing come across on Twitter. And so ultimately what they were able to do is refine the messaging, eliminate some confusion, and it ultimately netted in an elevated perception of the brand.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin, for that. And on the logistics end, we're seeing a lot of questions flow in. So sorry, I was just taking a minute to read some of your questions, which are great. I do have one other, speaking of questions, I have one other poll question for the audience, and that is, we talked about 6 high-level areas of application for social intelligence. And this is not something where you only have to choose one, but you can choose more than one. But I'd just be curious in terms of the areas that we talked about today, which are the ones that are most interesting to you? And again, I'm going to give about 10 to 15 seconds and have everyone put in their input, and then I'll showcase the results. I see things flying in right now, so wait 1 minute here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and now share the results here. All right, so now you should be able to see some bar charts again. So interesting to note that we have almost 60% for both trend identification, competitive intelligence analysis, brand marketing optimization coming up, so all over 55% there. At the bottom, laggards are the focus group participant recruiting, which again is probably the one that's the most of an outlier of the 6, and product ideation and development, and then informing traditional research. Now there was a good question about product ideation and development, so we'll come back to that. But let's go ahead and move to our first question from the audience. And Dave, I think actually this is one that's geared well for you, but Caitlin, you may be able to chime in on this one as well. And that is, if the question is, if you could go back in time, and don't we all wish that we could go back in time, especially from a research perspective, but if we could go back in time, what would you focus on from a research perspective, knowing what you know now or today that you didn't know, let's say, 1 or 2 years ago?
Okay, and thinking about that, one thing that really comes to mind from my previous work in traditional market research would be kind of the idea of using social to understand consumer language. Many times the language used by companies or brand managers, it really doesn't sync up with the ways customers are talking about products or services or things like that. And so what I found was, or what we found was, you'd have to do a lot of qualitative research, a lot of focus groups, and that's where you'd start to hear the different ways people talk about products, maybe the different terms they use for products. And what it requires is basically a lot of time, a lot of travel, and a lot of money to really get that language. And I think now what I see from social is you can get on those forums, get on Twitter, and really see how consumers are talking. And that way you can better prepare your surveys and your quantitative measures to really be in that customer language. So you're helping prevent respondents from being confused by the question you're asking, and you're really putting in that respondent voice. And so I think it really helps get at better data points and making sure that the respondents know what they're being asked and know how to answer it. So really getting at the heart of that customer language, I think, is a great way to use social media.
Great. And, Caitlin, I guess I'd just ask you, if you had a time machine and you could go back, is there anything different other than what Dave mentioned that you would think about?
The only thing that I would really add to that is that I think, having worked in traditional research, I think I was kind of caught up in a bit of a silo. And so I would get the results from the analysis, and I would be looking at my, having worked through my data set and trying to make sense of everything. And sometimes there are, shifts in behavior, or there are changes that really can't be explained just by that one piece of research alone. And so I think now, having my experience in social, I see how often my clients are integrating social with their traditional research, and often the two complement each other very nicely. And more often what we're seeing is that, as I mentioned earlier, we have social really kind of being that precursor or that signpost to things that would be coming down the pipeline for traditional research methodologies. And so I think that kind of, if I could do it all again, I would have moved out of my silo and kind of seen what else was out there and what other research would kind of help me make sense of what my findings were if it just wasn't adding up.
Great, thanks. And so, David, there's another question that was targeted at your example that you gave, and I'll kind of paraphrase here, but the question is, how do you match up segments defined with traditional research with your social audience? Most segmentation is attitudinal and need-based. So how can you identify consumers in social space and determine which segment they belong to?
Okay, yeah, and so it was very interesting to do this. Because we focused on forum discussion, that's where you see people really writing a lot. And because we had these really well-defined segments, so it really painted a picture of each segment, what we would do is read in through the posts, and you couldn't overlay the segments on every post, because if they were shorter or didn't give enough information, you really couldn't make that determination. But what we found was, as people were posting and the length of their posts and the way they were describing their needs and the services they were looking for, and just in general things about themselves, we really found that they were fitting within these predefined segments very well. So although we weren't able to overlay the segments on every forum post we read through and tagged, we were able to do it with enough that it really gave a lot of good information. So it really came down to going in and reading through each and every one of those posts and really getting a sense of where they fell within the different definitions.
Well, great. Thank you, Dave. And so, Caitlin, I'm going to throw out a question to you, although, Dave, if you want to jump in, feel free. The question is, what are the most common social media sites that you track? And for those narrow categories of sites, how do you find out which specialized sites yield those best insights? So again, which sites do you track? And I know, probably depend on the particular project you're working on. And then which are ones that you have found that have yielded the best insight or the best listening opportunities?
So I think that's certainly true depending on which clients you're working with. There's a variety of different sites that are going to bubble up. I think one of the things that I always find so surprising is that you've got forums, really, really where those golden nuggets of information are happening. Because on forums, this is where people are most engaged in conversations. They're not just posting or making one comment and then moving along, or for instance, like on Twitter, just sharing a quirky comment or forwarding a news article to a friend. This is actually a group of people who's highly engaged with one another, and they're having real conversations. With that being said, one of the things that always bubbles up for me with some of the clients that I've been working with, and in situations that you'd find very surprising, is sites like actually WeightWatchers.com. And what happens in some of these forums is that people come there to discuss their weight loss goals or challenges and to motivate one another and look for support. And then often what you find is that it builds a community, and there's a friendship and a connection between these people. And so all of a sudden they're talking about their financial situation, they're talking about their travel plans, and so things kind of digress into a whole different avenue of conversations. And so I think one of the key learnings that I've had is that you do kind of stumble across these real deep insights, often in places where you wouldn't have expected them to pop up.
And so in that case, Caitlin, just to kind of continue on, it doesn't mean that you have to be doing a study about weight loss to find value in that particular forum, because the insights may be about things such as personal habits, travel, financial habits, etc.
No, absolutely. That's exactly right.
Okay, great. Let's see. I have another question here, and there are a couple of questions that relate to allocating of time for social versus traditional research. And I can say from a perspective with all the conversations I've had internally at Visible that I have not seen there's a magic formula between social and traditional. But just reflecting, Caitlin, and maybe start with you, Dave, on your experience, do you see that for brands there's a certain amount of time? Is it still in the in your mind in the single digits, or do you see growth in that area in terms of time people are spending on utilizing social analytics versus maybe traditional research? Or is there really no necessarily correlation, both are growing?
I get the sense that there really isn't a correlation, that both are growing, and people are seeing the importance of social as a complementary piece.
And Caitlin, anything that you see in your world, to back that up, or differing with customers you work with?
I think one of the things that we've seen is that there really is a lot of growth with social, and actually kind of giving social more merit just because of its agility and its possibility of answering questions in real time and to really gauging a response. And also in isolating people that are key influencers. And so I think more and more what I see is that clients are really kind of seeing the possibilities that social provides. And again, just really looking to integrate that with what they're currently doing. Because I do think that there's a little bit of hesitation with kind of coming in full force with social, and what the implications are of social. And so I think there's just been kind of just slow steps in a forward direction to really integrate social and to really to see the value that it can bring.
Great, thank you. And then one other question. There were a couple of questions that to me related more to finding a needle in a haystack, and I know that I believe comment on if for example in social, is it possible to find someone, let's say, with a specific medical condition, or with something that would be very rare or unique to find. I know from clients and projects that I've had conversations with, that's one thing for social that they've relied on, is that ability where recruitment in more traditional methods can be extremely expensive and extremely time consuming, that using social to find people that might be talking about a specific medical condition can be a great way to go out and learn from things that they're saying, or to potentially use social to recruit them into other attitudinal or behavioral studies. I don't know if David or Caitlin, you've had any needle in the haystack type of experiences or anything that you could comment on there.
Yes, in working with a pharmaceutical company, we have done a number of studies for very rare diseases, and what they find is that they really want to learn what the patients are saying, what the caregivers are saying, and find that social is the best way to get at it, because you could have a very, very small percentage of the population affected by these diseases. So it just becomes a question of not being able to find them through traditional methodologies. But by going online and finding out where they're talking online and what they're saying, they've been able to get a lot of key insights about diseases that previously they wouldn't have been able to get any real information on. So I have seen it be used in a number of studies of diseases that are extremely rare.
And just to piggyback on what Dave was saying, I think that kind of one of the benefits of people, going online and posting online is that, first of all, when it comes to these issues of let's say rare diseases, they're often in forums where they're self-identifying that they have this condition. So it's quite clear that the person that you're looking for now, they've self-identified, so you know that you have the right target. And what you'd be surprised with is how substantial these comments are and how personal they are. And there's a sense of community online that's apparent in these forums and groups. And there's also a sense of security and safety because it is anonymous. And so while there's that community feel where they feel comfortable to share these things, it also doesn't have any repercussions on someone's daily life. It's not the people that they sit next to at work. And so there's a certain level of honesty and information sharing that is pretty impressive and can be very insightful.
Great. All right. And I do have, wow, there are a lot of questions. So one thing that I will note is that I know we're not going to be able to cover all the questions today in this session, but we do have names associated with the questions, and we'll try to make sure that we can get back to everyone that took the time to pose a question. And thank you. Your questions are amazing, and we have so many of them that I keep scrolling down to find more and more. But let me see if I can find one last question before we wrap up. I do see a couple of questions about data representation, data accuracy, comparing social data with data that you would see in more traditional research. And also I see some questions that talk about the shifts from traditional to social. And I think we've covered that a little bit, but I don't know either David or Caitlin, if you have anything, from your client experiences where you've had conversations with their, marketing or research teams in terms of the accuracy of social data compared to other traditional means.
Well, I think in terms of comparisons to traditional research, it's very clear that there is sort of an inherent bias with social data. But I think the point is to really embrace that data and to really use it to work for your benefit. And one of the ways that you can do that is by having a very targeted, specific group of people that you're looking for. You can capture them either through information that we have about the top sites of certain people of a certain demographic go to, or through just self-identification. So while there is, of course, there are issues with sample bias, I think that with social what you need to do is just have a highly targeted focus and really be kind of whittling down into certain groups that you're looking for specifically, and so you're really making that work for you as opposed to against you.
Great. And anything, David, on your side, anything else?
Yeah, I think Caitlin makes a good point of really being super focused when looking in. When you look at the broad spectrum of social, there could be some bias, but when you really have those search queries and those terms and everything you need to find the people you're looking for, you can really, that focus really helps you make sure you're getting the proper sampling and seeing the responses from the people that you're looking for.
Great. All right, well, thank you. And then again, thank you to the audience for all of your great questions. We'll make sure to capture these and get back to you individually. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to move on just to a couple of last slides here. And one is for Visible. For those of you who are not familiar with Visible, really the two kind of cornerstones that we have are the fact that with the Visible Intelligent Platform, we're really focused on getting to that right data. Again, that pinpoint data, finding the right segments, finding the right geolocation data, and ultimately the data that you can feel confident and trust in. We also have a team of experts, such as people like Caitlin and David that have been on the call today, who have had experience both in traditional research as well as in the social analytics and unstructured data space. And we believe that combining the people and the best platform together really helps find insight. And we know that for our clients, they want rapid access to that insight, and that's really what we're all about. And really, as a closing, if you have any other questions that you haven't had a chance to ask in the chat functionality today, we do have the email addresses for Caitlin, for David, and for myself here. So feel free to send us an email if you have any other questions. And if you're interested in learning more about Visible, we have links to our website. You can request a demo. You can follow us on Twitter. And again, we just want to thank everyone for participating today. This has been a huge audience. We really were excited about the interest in this topic, and we're excited to answer any other questions that you may have. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.